All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 President's Lecture here at CCAD. I'm Melanie Corn, and I'm the president of Columbus College of Art and Design, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. We are thrilled to host this discussion featuring Dean Mitchell, an acclaimed artist and CCAD alum. I'd like to take a moment to start by sharing my deep gratitude for the Columbus Museum of Art and their partnership on this event. Since I arrived at CCAD about 6 years ago, Museum Director Nanette Macy-Jones has always been someone I can call for an honest bit of advice and a quick yes to ideas for collaboration. So thank you for that, Nanette. And I would also like to thank our other sponsors for their ongoing support of making tonight possible, including the Skestos Endowed Fund for Visiting Artists and Lecturers and the Ohio Arts Council. This is our first event of CCAD's Fall Visiting Artists and Scholars series that features innovative artists, designers, and thinkers. During their visits to campus, these artists and designers and scholars teach workshops and seminars or engage in one-on-one mentoring and studio visits with graduate and undergraduate students. And this is one of many opportunities offered students to prepare them for their future careers and to support the college's mission to foster a diverse campus community that educates students so they can unleash their creative power to shape culture and commerce. In addition to engaging directly with students, each visiting artist takes part in a community lecture or conversation like the one you're about to see. These are always free and open to the public, and if you enjoy tonight's event, please be sure to join us for a future event. Two of our upcoming fall events that I'll tell you very quickly about include a roundtable discussion about queer banned books on Saturday, October 8th. This event is part of the Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, an annual comics, art, and animation festival here in Columbus. And we're proud to host the event's keynote as part of our Visiting an Artist Scholar series. 3 authors will discuss the impact of book banning and why comics are once again at the center of this discussion. Then on Thursday, November 10th, we're proud to welcome author Syed Jones for a discussion about his memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives, which is the college's first-year common read for 2022-23. Jones's coming-of-age memoir is about a young, black, gay man from the South fighting to carve out a place for himself within his own family and within his country. Again, both of these events are open and free to the public, and they're right here in Kanzani Auditorium, so I hope to see you back here soon. Finally, as you joined us tonight, you passed by our Beeler Gallery, which thank you for keeping it open a little bit longer so folks could come in and check out what was there. This gallery plays host to an array of contemporary and experimental art and design exhibitions. And in fact, as you may have seen, we have a brand new exhibition, 1,000 Miles Per Hour, a lens-based exhibition showcasing the power of space and perspective, and it just opened last week. So admission is always free, and I encourage you to come visit the gallery for the first time or again. All right, I know that's a lot to take in. I'm sure you weren't taking notes on it all, but you can learn more about these events on our CCAD website at ccad.edu/calendar. And now let's turn our attention to this evening. Hailed by Forbes as America's most underappreciated painter, Dean Mitchell is well known for his figurative works and landscapes. An accomplished painter adept in watercolors, oils, and other media, his work has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, American Artist, Artist Magazine, Fine Art International, ARTnews, and others. His art can be found in personal, corporate, and museum collections across the country, including right next door at the Columbus Museum of Art. I first had the pleasure of meeting Dean about 5 years ago when he opened up his incredible studio in Tampa, Florida to host a gathering of CCAD alumni. And I knew immediately just how important he was in the arts community based on the alums who traveled a fair distance to see him, not me. During that first meeting, and in any interaction I've had with him since, Dean has been humble, gracious, funny, and wicked smart, all of which you're about to experience. So please join me in welcoming esteemed CCAD graduate Dean Mitchell to the stage. All right. Mic check. Got to make sure you turned your mic on.
Yeah, I did.
All right. Excellent. The first step has been accomplished then. Thank you, Dean, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
When I had a chance to chat a little bit with Dean in preparation for this, I said, well, would you like me to share my questions with you? And he said, no, I just want to have a conversation. So don't tell me in advance what you're going to ask, which I really appreciated. It's a great trust in an audience and in me to help us steer this conversation. So I'm going to ask some questions. We'll go for a little while, and then we will leave plenty of time for questions from the audience as well. All right, so to start off, I've read your brief bio. I could go on for a whole hour just reciting all of your accolades and awards and collections. But in addition to what you would see on a CV, can you talk a little bit about your story behind the bio? Specifically, how did you get to CCAD?
Oh, that's a really good one. Actually, I submitted to quite a few schools, and quite a few were a distance away from Florida, where I grew up. And but CCAD, to be honest with you, I don't even know how I got in art school. And this is true, because I didn't really know what a portfolio was exactly. So you had to submit a portfolio. Well, I sent in my things in a small little manila envelope, drawings and sketches, and I got a lot of go to a community college, then reapply. I got a lot of that, and CCAD accepted me, and it was also close enough when my grandmother wasn't, worried about my being able to come home, because I looked at the LA design in Los Angeles, I believe, and it was just too far away. And also there was a catalog that I was given by a guidance counselor, so I was highly impressed with the catalog of CCAD. So it was perfect for me.
So how did you? So you grew up in a pretty poor and rural part of Florida.
Yes.
You grew up with your grandmother. Did you come to your early interest and love of art through school? Did you have art classes in school, or was it just a personal passion? How did you even think about going to art college?
Well, it was actually a combination of both. My grandmother actually bought me a paint my number set. That's what really sparked the interest. And so, but I always liked to draw cartoons, and I thought for a long time I was going to be interested in animation. And then I got more interested in a more personal sense of connection with a space in which I grew up in. Family was very, very important to me. My mother she got pregnant when she was in college, and so I found out after her passing that I was born in a place for unwed mothers. And I've often wondered why I'm attracted to certain types of imagery and spaces, and I think it has a lot to do with a sense of abandonment. I just met my father at the age of around 52. I have a great relationship with him now. But those kinds of experiences, I think, was a sense of trauma for me, and growing up in an impoverished area where there was a lot of alcoholism and all kinds of things. So, but I just always loved to draw, and I think in some ways it was therapy for me.
Yeah, a bit of an escape.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So your work in things that I've read about it, and of course just seeing it, has been compared to Vermeer, Wyeth, Hopper. That's some pretty outstanding company to keep.
Yes, it is. I don't mind it.
So what influenced your painting style?
You know what? I will say, when I was a kid, we always went outside. They have this term, they call it plein air painting, we just called it going outside and drawing. So you have this nice term for it now. But I think that the comparison has been very interesting. I think there is a sense of intimacy, and there is a sense of isolation. And I think that when I was in college, when I got here at the Columbus College of Art and Design, somebody kept saying something about Wyatt, and I didn't really know who Wyatt was. And so I went to the library, because library, best resource, and I discovered the book on Wyatt. So I was flipping through it, a lot of black and white, and there was some color. And what fascinated me about him was I looked through his book and I saw paintings of black people. And I was like, whoa, it's like, this is interesting. And I'm flipping through it, and I said, this is a white guy painting black people. I was like, wow, this is really, really fascinating to me. And I was also trying to figure out how to mix flesh tones and this kind of thing. And I went over to the museum here. There was nothing in the museum to pull from to get that kind of quality that I wanted in my own work, because I couldn't see anything visually. So I just poured over his book because of that imagery.
Yeah.
And that sensibility in which he brought, that sort of narrative sensibility. I was just, I guess I was craving for a sense of belonging in a space that I was unfamiliar with, and this was the first museum that I've ever gone to. And so I will say, to have a painting of mine in there is a huge, I mean, it's kind of a surreal moment.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. So you work in many media, and
Yes.
you may be best known for your watercolors, but also your oil paintings. So when you begin to think about a new painting, how do you choose your medium? Does the subject dictate the medium, or vice versa? Do you wake up one day feeling like you want to just work in watercolors that day, or?
No, it's I do have a problem with staying with one particular image whenever I'm working. I probably work on between 30 and 40 paintings at a time because my attention span will sometime wane unless someone is actually sitting for me and I'm engaging them, which is also a part of my process as a painter. And as far as the medium goes, it depends on my mood. And I also work in different mediums during the course of a day. I don't stay working on one thing because sometimes I run into a problem and I can't solve it, and I put it away or I turn it around. And I do like working in oils, a very tactile medium, and then moving from it to watercolor, because if I'm working in a very tactile medium, what happens when I get ready to go to watercolor, because of the physical exhaustion with working the way I work with oils, watercolor becomes easier for me to do. My arms are a lot freer and more gestural. And one of the things I will say about the school, we had great classes in figure drawing. And I can tell you, gesture drawing has served me well in every part of my ability to paint. Because my watercolors, as I've matured with them, they become more abstract and more filled with more energy and a sense of total abandonment, but I still have that knowledge of academia, but there's a sense of abstraction and freedom about them that I can see the maturity in the work. It's changing and fluctuating, and I like it.
What you were just talking about, I think, is something that I find really incredible about your work, is the way in which you are able to combine a very high level of realism with a flatness and a palette that really emphasizes the abstract nature of frankly, any 2D attempt at representing reality, right? And
yes.
How do you, so talk a little bit more, tell me more about how you think about, realism or representationalism and abstraction in your own work and the tension between them.
Well, the reality of it is I don't distinguish between the two, because it is through relationships of forms and color and line that we form the real. As you subtract some of those recognizable elements, you will discover that everything is an abstraction. So, and when I was in high school, had a junior high school art teacher. So I almost didn't go into art because I lacked the technical skills to make something look visually like something, which is what I wanted to do. And my high school teacher said, well, you see abstractly. And I said, well, Mr. Harris, what does that mean? I don't want to make it look like something. That's fine, all this abstract stuff. But he was saying how I see geometric shapes first. And I didn't understand abstraction until much, much later. As I began to paint more, especially with social media now, artists are constantly talking about the abstract quality of the work and the negative space and the way I position a figure in the space and how your eye moves around it and how there's a certain rhythm of rectangular shapes enveloping the figure and creating this wonderful kind of harmony.
Yeah.
And that is a way of seeing and positioning something that I think was always intuitive for me.
Yeah. Yeah. This piece, in fact, that we just paused on, makes me think a lot about that, of just the amount of space in this painting that is, empty space, and yet, of course, has so much meaning in it.
Yeah, this is actually a painting of my grandmother's sister and her husband. And in this particular image, he's actually stricken with cancer. He has lung cancer, and he's actually on his I took him to his chemotherapy. This is how this painting came about. And also, too, if you look at the skin complexion, it also takes into a dialogue about race, because there was a lot of tension between African Americans in terms of skin complexion. But here was these two people that I grew up with who loved each other, and it was an honor for me to be able to see that stage of his life, and also to see the frailty of life, which is something I've always been fascinated with. I've always been fascinated with death and life leaving the body. I had my great grandma Silly died when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. So I experienced death very early. So I think I have absorbed a sense of frailty and fleetingness about life, and how our existence is very fleeting. We're not here very long.
Yeah.
And so my work took on even more of a deeper meaning because of that experience and that trauma early on in my life.
Yeah. So, talking a little bit more about race, switching gears a little bit. So last year, as we've said before, Forbes magazine wrote in their fantastic profile on you with the headline, is Dean Mitchell America's most underappreciated painter? Judge for yourself. That was their headline. It's pretty great. So in that piece, you talked about how you don't have the political machine behind you of a celebrated promoter or an institution like Thelma Golden at the Studio Museum in Harlem. You never sought representation by a gallery in New York. So can you talk a little bit more of that? If you had to do it over again, or if you were advising other young artists, would you work harder to get that kind of validation, or that heart, that place in the heart of the contemporary art world, or did you find a freedom or value in kind of being maybe a little bit outside of that sort of machine?
Actually, it's a good question. Fame and fortune has never been my goal as an artist, I'll be honest. I pursue art because I love it, and because it was my freedom. It was a space in which I could be myself without anyone telling me exactly what I should do and how I should do it. And so I know the New York thing came up a lot, especially after I was in the New York Times. And my thing was, well, I don't want to move to New York. I had a lot of friends there. But after the New York Times article, people kept saying, you're very gifted and talented. You need to be in New York to get known. You need to be in New York. And so I've never really, it's not that I don't care, it's just that I am going to live where I want to live. I'm going to paint what I want to paint. And I find a sense of power and independence in that. And isn't that what art is about?
Yeah.
So I don't want to be controlled. That's why I haven't given a gallery an exclusive. I need freedom to do what I want to do and to do it my way, and let the chips fall where they may. And if I happen to make money and I have a fortune, great. But if not, I will have done it. I would have lived my life fully the way I want it.
And yet you have found great success.
Yes, I have.
And
indeed.
Getting to sit down with Barack Obama is no small brush with
Absolutely.
fame, for sure.
Yeah, look, you have to understand. I grew up in a small town, about 10,000 people. My mother, the first, and my grandmother's 4 children to go to college, to tell me I would never make a living as a black man selling pictures in America. Who is going to buy this work? Black people don't have the disposable income, and I ran into all of it, and I heard all the negativity from different artists of color who were much more mature about the art world and the politics of it. And so I sort of came up with my own system of way of getting my work out there on my terms and doing what I wanted to do. And did I have galleries to tell me that something wouldn't sell? Absolutely. And I moved on. you know, because they kept saying my work was too personal. They kept making excuses why they couldn't sell the work. Yeah. And so I figured out another way. I figured out another way to merit the attention of those who were interested in this and the type of work that I wanted to do.
Yeah. So, despite the fact that that much of your work really is about, you know, Black identity and about race, you have said, you know, that you don't want to be called a Black artist, and that you've been pretty blunt about the fact that you feel that there is, as we kind of talked about, this sort of kind of this elite network and circle, you know,
Sure.
amongst a lot of the Black artists and collectors, you know, again, centered around New York maybe.
Yes.
And some of them don't accept you, I'll fix that in a second, sorry, but some of you may not accept you because you don't have the right artist lineage, or, you know, you've been quoted as saying that perhaps they look at your style, again, you know, with references like Wyeth, as sort of too white. So that, though, you know, married with the fact that your work is so much about issues of being Black in America,
Yes.
and it's about gender and class and region and land,
Yes,
but about Blackness. And so, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of race and more specifically Blackness to your work?
Well, you know, it's you know, you already know I'm Black. Yeah. So I don't have to gong you over the head with that hammer. So the fact that, you know, I have always looked at race as sort of an interesting quagmire, a social construct that is destructive to our own humanity. And so in some ways I kind of decide to not necessarily sidestep it, but to go at, like, when you look at the paintings of my family, I've done paintings of my uncles who had cancer. I've had people I've done who had Alzheimer's. And so I have always tried to tap into a deeper sense of what we are as just flesh and blood. And so that, I think, transcends any race. Humanity is not predicated upon someone's race or religious ideology, though those social constructs can certainly influence your ideas about another person and their perceptions, depending on what religion they are, what color they are, which, as you know, is a very, very small part of what we are. And so we have all this knowledge now, and so I don't want to stay in this kind of tribalism state. I think that causes a lot of problems and conflicts. Now, what I do feel needs to be told is the honest history of America, and it is messy, but life is messy. The human condition is messy. We are messy. We are flawed, but at the same time, we don't have to wallow in it. We can figure out how to solve our differences as human beings and not continue a sort of tribalism. So I'm interested in the deeper part of what we are as just flesh and blood and as human beings, and I hope my work transcends that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in addition to a lot of, you know, kind of portrait work, you also do, you know, these incredible landscapes that, again, vary quite a bit from pieces that are more about the urbanness, often kind of,
Yes.
you know, empty urban, you know, maybe some of the urban decay, but then, you know, other pieces that are very much about, you know, the sort of natural spaces in America, right? Whether it's the
Yes.
South, the Southwest.
Well, let's talk about this one.
Yeah.
This is, I got thrusted into the Western genre. It's I don't know if you guys know much about the Western art genre, but I got invited to a show back in 1990 called the Hubbard Art Award for Excellence. I was 32 years old, and I was the only Black person in this particular show. Jamie Wyatt was in it, Henrietta Wyatt Hurt, Janet Fish, Richard Schmidt. There were some of the Burt Silverman, some of the finest realists, Richard Estes. There was a lot of people in this exhibition, and I was the only person of color. So I got thrusted into the Western genre. I found a lot of the landscape in the West sort of a romanticism about the West. And so when I got thrusted into this genre, I got pulled into these exhibitions held at these Western museums. and I started visiting the terrain, and I had some artist friends who were out there. And a friend of mine who lives in Scottsdale said, "Have you ever been to a Native American reservation?" I said, "No, I've never gone." You know, so we went out, and I was just awestruck of the poverty, and not that every part of it was, but there was so much of it. And I said, "Wow!" And Michael said, "God, look at all the poverty." I said, "Yes, look at it. This is what I shall paint. Mm-hmm. It will not be the romantic West. I want to go in the belly of the whale." Mm-hmm. And so when I presented this type of imagery, this is called trailer park scatter. It looked like it could be anywhere. It's a damaged space. And these are spaces in which people come out and they see on a daily basis, and how these kinds of spaces can traumatize us in ways that we don't know. There's a lot of alcoholism and things like this. And this space reminded me of how I grew up in that same kind of chaotic, underprivileged kind of environment. But even with all the chaos in those small shacks in the South and sitting on the porch were where we were encouraged by some of our elders to pursue our dreams, and they gave us this strength. So even within all this sort of visual chaos that you would ride by, you think there's no hope, but in some of those spaces there is hope, but there's still that chaos. And so there's this sort of haunting beauty and chaos that I've always been attracted to, and the discarding of elements that were once used for our survival are now discarded and thrown away. I have always felt like that as a human being in some ways, by my father not accepting me. And so these kinds of spaces tend to resonate with my spirit as a person. But I find beauty and a way of reflecting back to people a space that they should be more sensitive to, who may have possibly been born into privilege, that may have no idea what goes on in this space. But through my paintings, I can perhaps communicate this to pull some sensitivity from them and some compassion for people who emerge out of these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So switching gears again a little bit, coming back to CCAD for a moment, when you think back to your time here in Columbus and at Columbus College of Art and Design, what experiences or what classes, what learnings do you find yourself still reflecting on decades later?
That's a good one. Man. I will have to say, Dean Kanzani was like one of the most charismatic, articulate, colorful communicators about art. And I was always moved by his use of the language to try to describe art. And that was one of the most interesting classes at Color Concept. Yeah. And he was always talking about the grays, the tonality of the grays, the subtlety in between tones of tonality, all this stuff, And so it's like, oh, this is really, and for a long time we only worked in black and white and grays and stuff like that, and I learned about chroma and home value of a color and all these different things. So, but he was really, really interesting. Sometimes he would sling art, that wasn't great. And it was, but at the same time, I must say, at the same time, I would leave there feeling, I don't know, like a real artist in some sense of importance, that it was something important in society, and it did something to me that I really pulled on a lot. And then there were other classes too, but I think he was the most one that influenced me, I will say that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So earlier today you had a chance to see maybe 15 plus students' work, going through doing some individual critiques, with a number of our students. And what did you see reflected there that reminded you of your time here, and what did you see that was maybe different?
Well, what I found was I found myself connecting to them more than I could have possibly have hoped for. They talked about their own personal experiences
the reasoning behind what they were doing. And it was all about connecting. And it was about trauma, it was about neglect, it was about a lot of things that I grew up with. You know, even, there was one young lady we talked quite a bit about. She was, you know, attacked and, you know, compromised. And I grew up with that I grew up in that kind of space. I grew up in a space where my uncle got drunk a lot, and he came home and he just, you know, he cursed and he, all kinds of things, and he beat women sometimes, and he did certain things, and they fought, you know. But when he wasn't drinking, he was bright, brilliant. But then I found out more about him. He was interested in music, but he didn't have the opportunity to pursue. There was all kind of stuff tied up in all this. And then his father died, and my grandfather died in a jail cell because he was actually having a mild heart attack on the street. They thought he was drunk and threw him in a jail cell. And he died of a massive heart attack in a jail cell. So you can imagine what that would do to a young man and being traumatized by that kind of situation. So I learned a lot about what art can mean, not only to the audience that you're trying to serve, but it can also serve as therapy, because mine certainly has. And I do know that I've done paintings of, there's one painting in here that I did of Rowena, and she's on the cover of my book. If we can go back to that work, it may be, but she, you know, I met her right after I had gotten let. That's it. You can't really see the painting really well there, but that's okay.
Lights on it, yeah.
That's okay. But this particular woman, I will have to admit, saved my life in so many different ways, because I had just gotten let go from Hallmark. I had been fired. I was in a marriage that dissolved. And I found myself in a little bitty apartment on Armour Boulevard, wanting to take my own life. My grandmother died in the middle of this, who raised me. I was traumatized. And I met a young lady who introduced this woman to me, and I connected to her on such a deep level. She was in her 80s when I met her, and she was in her 90s when she passed, in her late 90s when she passed. And I did an entire series on her. And her painting was the painting that opened up a huge door for me in terms of collectors. The show I was telling you about that I was in with Jamie Wyatt, my painting of her was hanging between his and Henrietta Wyatt Hurd's. And it was in the top 6 for the $250,000 prize, though I didn't win it. It got purchased for $25,000, and the people who bought it were the sponsors of the show. Now, mind you, this was in the West. And so the people kept saying, the collector kept saying, it's wonderful, I just don't know where I'd put her in my collection. She doesn't quite fit in my collection. And there was all these different things that were said. But at the actual ceremony, when they announced me as one of the finalists out of the 50 so artists, though I didn't win it, my painting got the biggest applause from the 800 or so people in the audience, which was really quite puzzling. And the person who won it, of course, he got an applause because he was loved down there, but mine got a bigger applause. So Mrs. Hubbard, who was the sponsor of the show, and her husband, R.D. Hubbard, she runs over to me. She says, oh my God, you got a bigger applause than Howard Turpin. Won't that make news? And it did. It made news like crazy. And my mother was really funny, because you got to understand, this was 1990. So Jimmy Wyatt's painting was like $500,000. He had a small watercolor that was $200,000. So you got to understand, my mother was very puzzled by this, because my mother was thinking, you ain't gonna never make a living. There I was in this elite group of artists, and she's looking at prices, and she's saying, is he dead? You know, she says, is he dead? So, yeah, that's what she asked me. No, he's alive. So she said, my house didn't cost $500,000. You mean telling somebody's paying us to put something on a picture on the wall? I said, well, no, Mama, this is the art world, you know. So it was a lesson for her, but it was also a lesson for me about wealth and power. Because when she purchased the painting for $25,000, after I was a finalist, someone came over and offered twice as much. for the painting the same evening.
Wow.
And of course, she's wealthy, so she didn't care about money. She said, it's mine. You could have the opportunity to buy it. You didn't buy it. It's mine. But it also taught me something else. She allowed me to bring the painting back to Kansas City. And the irony of this story is I showed the entire series of sketches and watercolors and everything in Row at the Bruce R. Watkins Center in Kansas City. And a young African-American man came in, a young fellow came in and said, oh, wow, I can see how white people like your work. It reminds them of somebody that took care of them. Mm. So this was the dynamics of this conversation about this imagery. And so I thought to myself, this was the type of woman that I grew up, and these were the backbones of my neighborhood that I grew up in. And they, yes, did they work in a lot of the wealthy homes? Indeed they did. But believe me, these people were no Gone with the Wind type of imagery that Hollywood was perpetuating about this type of imagery. And so it has always been my goal too as a painter to sort of deconstruct that myth about this sort of mammy thing, because I didn't grow up with mammies. I grew up with very dignified women who were very sensitive and very sensitive to their families. It just so happened they were in certain social situations where they had very little power over their conditions. And so I grew up during the civil rights movement. So I know this image. I know it personally. And to have her to come and sit for me, and I'm painting her, and I'm talking to her, and she is saying to me, who is going to want this? She said, who's going to want a painting of an old black woman, Dean? What are you going to do with that? And when are you going to finish this thing? Because she was tired of sitting for me. You know? So I said, look, Miss Hyde, and when I told her it had sold, she said, oh, $2,500, that's a lot of money for a painting. I said, no, Ms. Hyde, it was $25,000. And so she couldn't believe that someone would pay that for something of her. Yeah. And I saw her just beam with joy, and that she felt seen, but she was already seen because she had touched so many lives. She raised a lot of children who, she raised a lot of kids, you know, she babysitted, and these kids would come back to see her. So this imagery is deeply woven into the American experience and woven into my own life. Yeah. It was my grandmother who told my mother to go back and get me, and they would raise me with as little as they had, you know. So this is very powerful imagery to me. This is, you know. So I did have a deep conversation with the young man to try to explore his emotion and his feelings about her, because I said, you don't really know her. I don't think you could even walk in her shoes. You have no idea what you're saying. Yeah. No idea. You have no clue.
Yeah. So you started talking a little bit about just some of those early examples of great success, and you know, one of the things that you also did when you got out of college is you went and worked for Hallmark.
Yes.
And so, you know, we have a lot of students who may end up on similar pathways, right? Where many of our students may be aiming for a career at either a large company or, you know, as an entrepreneur. And then we have others, of course, who are aiming for a career that maybe looks more like where you ended up. And so, you know, thinking about perhaps, again, some of those students you met today or others here in the audience, for those who are seeking, you know, to follow a path that leads them to the kind of, you know, success that you've had in the fine arts world, what advice would you give? You know, how would you advise them in terms of their path forward?
Wow. Of course, you know, it was a different time in which I was coming up and trying to figure out the art world. There's a lot more information that you're more privy to it now. But I will say this: I don't think, if my goal was to make a lot of money and become famous, I would not be sitting here, because this was not an easy journey by any stretch. And you will be discouraged. You will be discouraged by galleries. You will be discouraged by not being able to sell your work, and all these different things. And because for myself, as a person of color, because of the racial component of this, I worked very hard to remove that from the work,
because, and so this is where I will say the art shows that I entered in competitions, I felt like they don't need to see me, they just need to see the work. And so competition gave me that anonymity that I could send the work in and no one had to know what color I was, because the work didn't scream a sort of ethnic, type of a style that I was doing. But I will say this to young artists, whatever you do, what really holds you true to your vision and your passion is your love for humanity, because that has shaped me. It was never money, though I have done well with making money, and it's still not. It won't sustain you. Even if you made a lot of money, if you compromise your soul for it, you will self-destruct in other ways. And so that's why I didn't go to New York, because it wasn't something that I wanted to do. Now, should I have wanted to actually go to New York and had a deep reasoning for that move, then that would have been totally different. But to move there, to network, to feel like I can weave myself into this hodgepodge of a mess of what they call the art world, and which it is a hodgepodge of the mess. I soon stay away from all that. I feel like if the work has power to it, it is what I'm after, not for the present moment just to feed my own materialistic appetites, but to leave a really reflective moment a time in which I lived. And hopefully I would have left something that would have moved us better toward harmony in some way.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. So you mentioned earlier that you are sometimes working on 30 to 40 works at a time.
Yes.
I had a question here, starting with, you're also a very prolific painter.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. And of the many paintings that you have done, which ones stay with you and why?
Which ones stay with me?
Yeah.
There is, I don't have a slide of it, there's one of my uncle that's dying of cancer. He's lying on a quilt, and it's titled Release Me. It's in the Kemper Museum Contemporary Arts collection. There is one that is in this slide. It's called Rowena's Last Visit. I believe it may be the second slide.
Nope, gotta go back.
Maybe way back in the beginning, actually. I don't know if we can move back that far that quickly, but it is. I'll tell you about the painting. It was during her last visit to my home, and she was quite ill and quite frail, and she was so weak she couldn't walk. So I went out and I lifted her from the car and I picked her up. She was, she weighed very, very little. She was very thin at that point. And I picked her up and I took her in my home. And it was quite warm, but she was feeling cold. And I threw some sheets around her. But the painting's titled Rowena's Last Visit. And
Is this the one?
No, I think it's just before this one, I believe. This one. It's called Rowena's Last Visit, and she was quite frail, and we were talking to her, and I ran and got my sketch pad, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, just sketching a little bit, Rowena, and so I sketched her out. This was done from a sketch. I sketched her out, and we were talking and stuff, and I was sitting there watching her, frail, but still there was this dignity intact. But you could feel a life sort of coming to an end, and I wanted to capture that, to celebrate her. And I, on purpose, if you look at her hand, it kind of bleeds off of the frame of reference. That came about as watching in my own family, my grandmother holding people's hands, and when my grandma Celia was ill, they would hold her hand and they would talk to her. So by bleeding her hand off of the frame of reference is actually inviting the viewer in to touch her. But it won me my first gold medal at the American Watercolor Society, which I have won 3 times, all for African American figures. And so it was, it's a celebration of her. And I still own this painting. And if you look, her eyes just kind of shifting. I looked deep into her eyes because there was a subtle gray around her eyes, because I took notes as I'm drawing. I'm taking notes of her. But that was the last time she was in my home. And she had no kids. I got an attorney for her to make sure that she was taken care of. And, when she passed, that was hard for me.
Yeah.
It's like losing my grandmother twice.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry for that, but
Yeah.
what an amazing tribute to her to capture her spirit.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we've got time for questions from the audience. Vice President for Institutional Engagement, Chris Mundell, whom many of you know, is going to be walking around with a mic. If you got a question, just wave your hand. Chris will find you. And if you could wait for the mic, it'll just help us make sure we capture the question on the recording and everything. So I think right back here in the middle, yeah.
You're first, I'll check if it's working. Here you go.
Hold it. My question is, where do you think you saw the most drastic change in your practice as time went on? Like where did you see just like a shift? Or if there was a shift?
A shift in the work?
Yeah.
I would say over the last 10 years or so, painting is, for me, the more you know about painting, the more difficult it becomes. It doesn't become easier. It becomes more difficult because you acquire a certain amount of knowledge. And then once you acquire a certain amount of knowledge, how do I then tap back into the intuitive nature of that knowledge without making it look formulaic? And so this is why I like a lot of abstract expressionist work. Franz Klein, Robert Motherwell, Jasper Johns, Joan Mitchell. In fact, I pulled a lot from Joan Mitchell and the way she drops paint on a surface. My watercolors became more expressive, less labored over, but more spontaneous and abstraction. If you look at some of my watercolors, people think they're very meticulously rendered. They have that great illusion. I have the ability now to put in a few lines to suggest a form without having to render that form, over-render it. I find rendering interesting still, but not as interesting as a more intuitive process where I get lost not so much in the subject itself, but in the freedom of the expression of the moment. And that takes a certain amount of maturity to be able to let go. And sometimes paintings work out, sometimes they do not. And I kind of like that. I kind of don't like things to be too predictable now. Watercolor has certainly given me that kind of freedom. And I am brutal on brushes, I will tell you. I am a brutal painter, especially when it comes to watercolor, because I slam brushes down to get a certain kind of energy and a splash. There's a painting of a barn that I have in this group of slides where, I did a lot of barns as a kid. I thought, I'm not going to do any more barns. I'm never going to do any more barns. I've done enough of them. And I go back to my hometown, and I'm much more mature, much older man, and I'm looking at these things, and I'm seeing nature kind of ravage these spaces, and like some of these were done from drawings and sketches, but it's like you look at it, it has a ghostly quality about it. But if you look at how I'm dropping the paint, it is an abstract expressionist. You can feel the energy in the paint, the way I'm dropping it and slinging it. But at the same time, because of the relationship and way I've kind of placed the structure, you see it, but it is an abstraction. It's a space in which I worked in, and it's called tobacco wealth in the weeds, because I titled that for a reason, because there were people who built enormous amounts of wealth off of the backs of people of color who worked in these spaces. I was one of those kids. And here I am now going back to my hometown and painting these spaces in which I emerged out of, and seeing a kind of deterioration and a kind of ravaging energy by nature kind of consuming this structure that I used to work in at one time. And it's a very haunting thing to see a space in which people used for their own survival, because it was the only means in which they could survive. And now I'm doing a series on huge environments of these large, massive structures that used to be mining fields and big corporations at one time, these steel mills and different things. I don't just see a building. What I see is a kind of way of life coming to an end, a sort of usage of a space that has now turned tragic. And now I go back, and some of these spaces are now finding new life, and people are finding that maybe perhaps we shouldn't always throw away. Maybe we should recycle and figure out a way to bring this space back. And I see artists doing the same thing. This new generation of artists is not just throwing away. They're pulling back in some of the waste and turning it into something beautiful. And I think that we need that more now than ever. I think in this day and age, humanity is at stake. Our very existence is at stake, based upon our waste and our appetite for materialism. And seeing artists move back to things that have been thrown away gives me a sense of hope in our own humanity, our own existence on this planet. So.
Yeah. Over here.
Somebody else got a question?
Hi, so, what does your workday look like as a professional fine artist?
What does my workday look like?
Yeah, your day-to-day.
Yes. Now you sound like my family. It's funny because my cousin Carla, who poses for me, we grew up like brothers and sisters. She's a first cousin. She would call me up and she'd say, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm going to the studio." "Going to the studio?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to work." I said, "Going to work," and then she knows what I mean. And she said, "You go every day?" I said, "Yeah, I go every day, Carolyn. I go every day. And if my wife lets me go on Saturday, I go on Saturday." I said, because, and I have a very understanding wife, I must say so, because I am a kind of artist, if I am gone 2 days from my space, it takes me a day to be able to go back in to the isolation in which I need to work. And so my wife is very understanding, so I said, "I got to go in." She said, I know. I said, "I won't stay all day. I'll just go in for a few hours and draw, paint a little bit, and then I'll be home," because I have children, so I have to be very sensitive to that. But I am fully dedicated to my work, and I don't really exactly see it as work. I see it as an unbelievable life that I have, and I love it with all my heart. So it's a joy to me to go to my studio, because sometimes when I walk in, I can't believe I actually have a studio. So it's been so great. I cannot deny that. So when I go to my space, it's like my little piece of heaven, and I get to do what I want to do. So it's fun, but it's also work, and I get to play, and if it doesn't work out, nobody's looking at me going, "That didn't work," It's not like working when I worked at Hallmark. You got these people supervising, and you got them coming in, and they're critiquing you and telling what color maybe you should move it over there and do this to it and do that to it. And in fact, when I started working at Hallmark, the supervisor comes and say, "Where's your layout?" I was like, "What layout? I don't do layouts. I go right to the thing," So they didn't really like a lot of that. So I realized commercial art was not my calling. So I had to figure out another way to have freedom. But yeah, a work day, I stay from I probably get to the studio around 9. I'm there till about 7 is the cutoff time, because the wife is going to call if I don't get home. So, and the house is only a mile away. So And some of my friends have their studios at their home. I can't have I need my space because I need that distance because I know my wife would be pulling on me about stuff. So rather than have that tension, I just have a separate space. So it's yeah. And like I said, I paint what I want. I do it on my own time, my own pace, and I love it. But it's taken me don't get me wrong, it wasn't always this way. It was a lot of work to be able to get to that point in my life.
Yeah.
So, but I love going to work. So.
We have another question. Oh, okay.
What is the feng shui of your studio like? Like, do you listen to music, or like, how do you get in the mood?
Oh, get in the mood. I love this. Get in the mood. I better be in the mood when I walk out the door, from my house, I don't rely on moods when I work. It's kind of like I used to play a lot of music when I was in Kansas City. I don't know, there's something about having kids that you want silence. So when I get to the studio, it's total silence. And I have all this fancy equipment I put in my studio, and I don't even use any of it. But it's funny how you say that, but it's sometimes I will play some jazz, I'll admit that. I'll play some jazz. I like jazz. And so, but I play very little music now. And when I get to work, I'm so into what I'm doing, I'll look up and I go, oh my God, it's like 2 o'clock and I haven't had lunch yet. I gotta get some water, I gotta drink some water, because I'm so immersed into what I'm doing. My wife said, she'll call me, you coming home for lunch? I'm like, oh yeah. It's 2 o'clock, I didn't realize it was 2 o'clock. So it's, the studio is, again, like I said, sometimes I play music, but most of the time I don't. I like the complete silence. And I used to do workshops, where I actually had to paint in front of people, It's these workshops, it's really funny. You have a model, whatever, and sometimes people bring in their little photographs and they do their sketches and things. And I was doing a workshop, and nobody wanted to paint. They just wanted to watch. So I said, look, this isn't a watch me paint. This is a workshop. It's got to work. And so I find a lot of people, when I was in Kansas City, they were artists, and you would go to these openings and things, and they'd have like 1 or 2 paintings, and I would go, where's your body of work? And I said, this is like their body of work, And I had a gallery there that picked me up, and she would come over to the studio from Manhattan, Kansas, to pick up artist work. And I would have all these paintings. She would just take about 30 paintings back with her. She started getting complaints from other artists, and started calling it the Dimensional Gallery. It was really funny. But she said, well, she said, look, you guys got how many paintings? 3 or 4. He has like 30, 25. This guy works. So the studio is a place where I'm totally absorbed into what I do. And again, that work ethics has served me well. I certainly got that here at CCAD, because you really had to work to survive in this environment. You got to work. Yeah.
You got to put in the hours.
You got to put in the hours.
Got to put in the pencil miles, so to speak.
You do. You really do.
So one more question over here. Jonah, right? Josh. God, it's close. So I'm going to pick on you for a second, Josh. I was talking about you the other day because I came out of my office and there were 2 students out there checking out the space, and they eagerly said, hi, are you the president? I said, yeah. And so they introduced themselves to me. I terribly forgot his name, Josh, but I told someone else about you. I said, but these 2 students came and talked to me, and they were so excited, and they were just walking around campus checking out the gallery spaces. So thank you for that. And with that introduction, turn over the microphone to you.
Thank you. My question is, how did you make the transition into supporting yourself fully through independent art?
How did I go into support?
How did you make the transition sort of from working at Hallmark and doing other things into being able to fully support yourself from your art?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a good question, and it's a loaded one. And I have a loaded answer. When I got fired, I had very little. wound up in a small apartment, not very much at all. And believe it or not, I went out and bought a book. How to invest $1,000 to $5,000. And I didn't have $1,000, believe me, to invest in anything. But I got this book, a little paperback book, and I read it, and I found out about all kind of investment firms and Fidelity and Vanguard and American Century. And so I took out an IRA, which is a retirement fund, and I put $500 in it and another $500 in it. So by the end of the year, I had at least $1,000 in it. And I would get this thing and I would look at it because they send you these printouts. And I went, oh my God, I'm going to always be poor. My mom was right. I'm never going to have any money. So I thought, okay, that may be my destiny. And I stopped focusing on that. And I actually entered art shows. Believe it or not, art competitions put me in a rhythm where not only was I making money from the shows, because I wasn't able to sell the work because the galleries kept telling me it was too personal, it was too this, it was too that. So I said, no, I don't think it's that. I think it's the audience. They don't have the audience that I need. And so I started putting my work before other fellow peers to compete for prize money. So during the course of a year, sometime I would win between $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, just with competitions. And I bought metal frames in which I rotated my paintings out and shipped them. That way I didn't get anything custom done. I would mat them and put them out. And I was winning money. And so what I did with that was when I would win something, I would send in my winnings to the Kansas City Star and they would publish it. Next thing I know, I get a call from a reporter. And then I was in some local shows and a girl turned me on to a reporter for the Kansas City Star. He did a big article on me. That started getting me more recognition. And so the recognition start following, magazine articles start following. And at the time, I will admit, I did not want people to know I was a person of color because I felt that was obviously some kind of obstacle that I felt was going to hold me back. And so I entered these shows religiously. And so when these magazines kept knocking, I started getting more and more known. And so this is how I got invited to the Hubbard Art Award for Excellence things, where there was a $250,000 prize. I entered different shows. One show was called Art for the Parks. I won a $50,000 prize. I won the top prize. And this happened to me repeatedly. I wound up with a publisher. They did a small PBS documentary with Billy D. Williams hosting the program. There was a painting that was $2,500. I couldn't sell it for $2,500. Ended up selling it for $30,000. So I recognized the provenance of these competitions. And then I wanted a book published. I couldn't get a publisher to publish my book because they said a book by a black artist didn't sell. So I published my own first book. It cost me $75,000 to publish this book. Now, how did I publish the book? I pre-sold the concept to my collector base. By that time, I had a collector base. I offered them an original drawing. For $250, you can get it if you order it by this time, because I was doing a limited edition. And if they ordered it after that date, you pay twice as much, $500. So before I had put pen to ink to actually design this book, I had brought in about $35,000. And I had not even designed the book.
So you created Kickstarter before there was Kickstarter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
this generation thinks you created Kickstarter, but really it's been happening for quite a while.
So there is a business component to this because the book, I winded up, because of the competitions, I wound up getting a gallery in New Orleans. New Orleans established me financially as a painter because I was in what they call an international market. Now, this gentleman who owned these galleries owned a gallery in Mississippi. And this is where I learned about representation. I entered a show at the Mississippi Art Museum. I got the top prize, went down to collect the prize because they wanted me to come down and do a workshop and all this. And a lady took me over. Her name was Sanya Williams. She took me over to a gallery. It's called Bryant Galleries. I went into the gallery with her. Every painting was sold, every single one. $18,000, $20,000, $30,000. They're all watercolors, not very big. And I left there like a deer in the headlights. And I thought, how is this possible? She said, you're just as good. I said, yeah, but I can't even get $1,000 for anything. So I learned about who represents you matters. and I learned about the seal of approval from certain dealers and certain things. This same gallery used to be my life for 10 years, that Hubbard Award for Excellence. My name wound up in a magazine he called, and that connection was made. My first show in Mississippi did not do well. The collectors didn't come out. He was upset over all of it. Moved my work to New Orleans. We sold here or there, but the book I was doing that they say wouldn't sell, my sales tripled because of the book. Tripled. Marketing. Not only just marketing, but I had the ability to tell my story, so now I became something else. And then I was able to list my awards, and so I began to understand, well, how come artists of color weren't known? Because the publishers were not willing to take the risk. They were not willing because they didn't see a market. You're not going to sell this because, black people don't buy art, or black people didn't have the wealth, or, I had these constant stumbling blocks. But what I'm saying is, by taking control of my own life and not listening to people telling me what was possible and what wasn't possible, and that what I was doing was vanity press, those same dealers that were saying with vanity press are now selling my book. So this is why I say you use what you have. Whatever's in your toolbox, whatever that is, your talent. I felt like all I had was my talent and my ability. Now, when I got ready to design a book, talk about Ccad coming through, Ccad came through big time. We did projects where we moved squares around and negative space and all this stuff, and then I had classes with Ashenbrand and where we use type and with all these fonts and selecting fonts and stuff, because I had a guy who said he was a designer, and he had the type was so big, font isn't right, it should be subordinate to the image, and I'm having this, I had to go down and design the book myself. And computers were just in their infancy. So I said, look, move it here, do it here, put this here, move that there, drop this here, move that over here slightly. I need a little bit more negative space around this. I need to breathe over here. I need the lettering to go here. And so I designed the book probably within less than 2 hours. I told him where to put things and where to drop things. And we had it. And I had it published. When it came back, I sent it to the galleries, and they asked me who published it. I said, well, and you look at the table of contents, it said Mitchell Studios. I said, yeah, Mitchell Studios. But that one decision changed the course of my life. And I don't mind sharing with you, I'd have an opening, $500,000 in sales at an opening. Before the year's out, over $1 million a year in sales. So 401k went from $1,000 a year to like $40,000. I would put $40,000 a year in a 401k. Whatever the max was, I would max it out. I got taxed up the yin yang, but that was okay too. And then I opened up a Vanguard municipal bond fund that was fairly tax exempt. That also gave me, before it was over, I had quite a bit of money in it, and I would get about close to $30,000 in interest, in which I would use to go out and buy other artists' work to support them.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so key notes from that. Invest early and often.
Invest,
okay.
yes, and you have to do it religiously.
Your small amount of money that you think isn't worth investing is worth investing.
So don't think small. Don't think that $1,000 or $500 or whatever you can do to do it, because time is very elusive. You'll be surprised what happens over a certain amount of time of just the discipline to do it. The discipline to do it. And it's the same thing with being a painter or an artist. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually do it. And also don't let people destroy your, don't let people steal your joy in your ideas, in your sense of self, in your sense of moving in the world. The one thing that education does for you is that whatever is put before you, it gives you the ability to critically think about the moment and how will that serve you in terms of what you want to do with your life and what you want to accomplish. Because people always start at no. They always do. And it's your job to find a way around that, and you'll be surprised how fast they will start asking you to do things. So just believe in what you're doing, I said. And it's not going to be easy. It certainly wasn't easy for me. It took a number of years for people to, and I had galleries telling me something wouldn't sell. I had that at Bryant Galleries that were handling my work in New Orleans. They told me these young black men on the street wasn't going to sell, and they sold both of them for like $40,000 each. They called me, do you have any more of those? So a lot of times the galleries don't know. But by then, I took a risk and sent it anyway to his gallery, and they sold it. So he stopped bothering me. He used to try to tell me what to do. He just said, you know what? I'm just going to leave you alone and let you paint. So you have to believe in yourself. But sometimes, but when you do make money, I didn't run out and buy a BMW or a Porsche, which I could have easily have done. I rode around my same car for 15 years. 15 years, had rust spots all over it. The only way I got rid of it, somebody hit me. and then I got rid of it. But what I'm saying is, in your youth, if you plan, I would never have been able to have a family if I would have went out spending my money on every little thing or every little appetite that I had. I controlled my appetite, and I stayed very focused and disciplined, and I invested my money properly. Made a world of difference in my life now and my family's life.
Yeah. So I know that there are some folks who may want to come just chat with you individually for a moment here when we end, but last question, what are you working on right now? Do you have anything coming up?
Oh, yeah, well, there's always something coming up. Actually, I have some things I'm in out west at the, it's called Masters of the American West at the Artery. And then there is, I just had a show at the Huntsville Museum of Art, solo exhibition. And then I have something going on with the commercial galleries as well. I'm always feeding the monster in some ways. But again, it's always about, a kind of social commentary. I'm really into this idea of space and how it affects us psychologically. So I'm still into that phase of things, and still doing a lot of portraiture and things like that, and friends. So.
Yeah.
But it's, again, it's, I never know what's around the corner because sometimes I get calls from a museum or, like the painting No Way Out that's at the Columbus Museum of Art. That was a resale. And I saw it at the commercial gallery. I thought, God, I need to try to get this back. It really belongs in a museum. And when I found out it had sold, and it sold to someone here, I said, oh my God, this is too surreal. This is like perfect. And so when I heard that the museum accepted it, I was very, very thrilled about that because it's the first museum I'd ever gone in to. And so to have a work in there, again, it was surreal. So, but I'm, working on a lot of stuff. But I will say, I am doing some more things with collage now. I am doing some more things with materials and collage. So I noticed a lot of the students were doing that too, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So, so I actually got some ideas for you guys.
Excellent. Always learning.
Always
which is what a good artist should be.
That keeps it exciting. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and please just join me in another round of applause for Dean Mitchell.